Dalvin Cook play for the Vikings this season? That and more this week on the couch. If we're leading with the Vikings, we got Paul Charchian here. Paul, is Dalvin Cook going to be a Viking? I'm not sure.
I would have said 95% no 2 weeks ago, but the fact that he is still lingering on this roster, I guess opens the door a little bit more than we thought he would. Now, the Vikings are still dead last in cap space, and they still need to sign Justin Jefferson this offseason. I've got to believe just from a money standpoint, this team's not going to put the same $17 million it's got into that position that it's got right now. I can't see a way that Dalvin stays here. It sounds like they're just waiting this thing out to find the best offer, the best landing place. And I don't know what that might be with a running back rich draft headed our way, Sig. Mm-hmm. I just don't think there's a ton of value out there to be had for Dalvin Cook. And again, surprised he's not already gone. Still expect him to go. But the fact that he's still here opens the door. Maybe there's another scenario where this plays out in such a way that Dalvin figures out his best opportunity is to remain on the team with a smaller deal.
Yeah, it makes sense that maybe the only way he would stay is if he would take a pay cut, a pretty significant pay cut.
Yes.
But he also may understand that because what's the number? 7.9 million dead cap, I think.
Yeah.
There's a $2 million injury guarantee. So since he had that shoulder surgery, if they cut him, they're going to have to pay him that $2 million. But like you said, his cap number is not viable. But he may calculate that if he went out on the market right now, he wouldn't get more than Miles Sanders for a year, not even a multi-year deal.
Right.
So he may decide that. But I certainly think that when the Alexander Madison deal, 2 years, $7 million, that's starter money.
That is
for a running back.
For running back, point. It is, yeah.
So that set up the alarm bells for me. But like you said, there's buyer's markets, and then there's the running back market in the NFL right now, right? Because what do you like? Do you like a big, powerful back? We got Derek Henry. Do you like a patch catching back? We got Austin Eckler. What are you looking for here? What do you want? Because I think that the Vikings, like you said, will have to wait it out. But I think if I hear you correctly, we should still, if we were projecting the Vikings roster today, and we had to just which side of the 50-50 you're on, we're projecting it without Dalvin Cook.
Yes, we are. Yep. I think the odds are that this team, that Alexander Madison is your week 1 opening starting running back for the Vikings. And while I'm kind of lukewarm on Madison as a talent, I think he's just a serviceable talent, not a lot better than that. That's the way it looks right now. The Vikings have just 5 draft picks. And so, and so many needs. I don't think they put a draft pick toward a meaningful draft pick towards running back either. So, the way it looks the way it's shaping up right now, I think Alexander Madison's your starting running back for Minnesota.
Let's talk about the Vikings a little bit more while we're on the subject. All right.
Yeah.
Because last year when the new regime took over, there were questions about guys like Eric Kendricks and Adam Thielen. And maybe even if you were listening, Dalvin Cook, not so much a question about Dalvin Cook last year, but where does he fit in? Even Kirk Cousins, where does he fit in? And we saw them last year not rebuild, and they won the division, and then lost to the Giants. And this year, it seemed like they let Kendricks go. He's with the Chargers now. They let Thielen go. We'll talk a little bit more about him in a second. Thinking, okay, now they're kind of facing reality. But then they signed Marcus Davenport to a pretty expensive 1-year deal. They signed Byron Murphy, which I love that signing. I don't even care where you're at in your career, your franchise arc. He's a really good player, and he's going to be an upgrade from Patrick Peterson. So it seems like they're kind of in between. And then I see this morning on the Athletic, when they do their beat writer mock, that they had the Vikings. I can't remember the name of the beat writer for the Vikings, the Athletic, maybe Chad Graff, moving up to take a quarterback. What we can kind of package this all together, Paul. Where do you think the Vikings are, or where they see themselves at? Not where they are, but where they see themselves at in the arc of this franchise, of this new regime. And would you rule out a quarterback, or do you think no, that kind of thinking, the Vikings could be one of the teams to take a big 4 quarterback in this draft, is pretty reasonable?
Kirk Cousins has 1 big contract left in him. He's 34 years old. He'll turn 35 in August. And he's got 1 more 3-year deal, maybe 4-year deal left in his arm. He doesn't want to do another 1-year extension. Kirk's on the last year of his deal. he doesn't want to keep doing this cobbling together 1-year deals, which he's given the Vikings the last couple of years, these short extensions. But he's running out of time to do that because his leverage goes down as he gets into his 30s. So he doesn't want the short-term offer. And that has really put the Vikings into a position where they have to start thinking about 2024 now and that quarterback position for 2024, because I believe there's a less than 50% chance Kirk Cousins is the starter next year. By that, I mean 2024, to be extra clear, not
right
season. And so, yes, I do think the team is looking to mobilize and get the quarterback of the future onto this roster if they can do so affordably. They're hindered by a variety of things. As I mentioned, the lack of picks, the lack of salary cap room, all big issues to make it very hard to negotiate to a quarterback that can likely help you. But I suspect that they will end up drafting a quarterback at some point, and maybe it ends up being a second-tier guy, Hendon Hooker, who might be a third guy, depending how you look at it. But I believe they will try to roster somebody they believe could be their 2024 starter this year.
The division belongs to the Lions. Well, maybe we can dream. I have a whole bunch of topics, Paul, because every time we get together, we never have enough time to talk about everything. But I just want to know, looking over the last couple of weeks, the plate tectonics of the NFL in motion, what stands out to you? What do you want to talk about? What's something that you feel either hasn't been given enough attention, or people aren't saying something really important about it, or you want to just pile on and say, yeah, this is a big deal?
Yeah, there were lots of big moves over the course of the last 2 weeks, obviously. I think the one that I feel like maybe we haven't spent or given enough time to is that Derek Carr can bring real competency to a Saints offense that wasn't half bad last year. And it's got all of this young potential talent on it that I think was really underutilized in a lot of ways last year with Andy Dalton, Chris Olave, and Rashid Shaheed, and Juwan Johnson. I mean, these are all guys. And against all odds, Michael Thomas looks like he's going to be with the team.
Right.
I mean, this is an offense that can suddenly look pretty competent. And, for as Carr is not a top tier passer at all, but, every year you're getting 24, 26, 28 touchdowns, 4,000 yards. And I think he can really help this offense in a way that for most of the nation, we haven't really had much discussion on in the fantasy community since that move went down. I think it was kind of met with whatever. It's Carr to the Saints. But I think he has the potential to unlock a lot of talent in these young players. And I'm excited about that move.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned Rashid Shaheed, just because it reminds me that Deontay Hardy, who could be actually underrated acquisition for Buffalo, giving them an element they didn't have in their offense. And then there's another undrafted free agent, the Saints, and their ability to unearth undrafted free agents. Juwan Johnson, who you mentioned, who signed that 2-year, $12 million deal. Probably the reason I was lukewarm about Derek Carr coming to the Saints, being down here in New Orleans, Paul, is we reunited with Dennis Allen. Dennis Allen, not exactly a smashing success in his first go round as a head coach. And, as a tactician, as a strategist last year, was just terrible. Probably the Saints should have won the division last year. They had a good enough team last year to win the division. And as Scott Barrett pointed out a few weeks ago, Andy Dalton was actually pretty good last year. We'll see how much of an upgrade Derek Carr is for Dalton. But you mentioned Michael Thomas. I'm just wondering, and I don't know how much Michael Thomas's ADP is going to move, but I think before he re-signed with the Saints, it was like a 10th round pick. Are you in on Michael Thomas in the 9th or 10th round if it stays there?
I'm not. And even though I just said I like Derek Carr and I like what he brings to the table, part of what I like is that he brings more of a downfield passing element. He was 4th in intended air yards last year. Dalton was 22nd. That's not Michael Thomas's game. And I don't want to take, maybe it's just me, I don't want to take anything away from Chris Olave and Rashid Shaheed and these young, talented players. So maybe in my mind, I don't want Michael Thomas sapping receptions away from those guys. I want them to develop with a lot of usage. And, that doesn't mean that Dennis Allen wants that, but that's what I want. And I'm, at this point, who hasn't been burned by Michael Thomas in the past 3 years? Right. I think we've all felt that sting at least once, and I don't think I'm signing up for that in the 9th round again. I need more value.
Yeah, it's like, who's going to take Michael Thomas in your league? Well, who hasn't taken him in
That's right.
The last 3 years?
Exactly.
It's funny how emotional scars, it leaves a mark, Michael Thomas, in fantasy football over the last few years.
It sure does.
Tansing on the Raiders, I'm always looking for, so what my mindset switches to as far as fantasy, Paul, as far as figuring out what's important, is if we look back last year, And what was really important? Well, I think one of the things that was important was understanding which offenses had the potential to take a step forward, right? If you anticipated Philadelphia taking a step forward and you were higher on Jalen Hurts, A.J. Brown, Devontae Smith, Miles Sanders than others, you profited. If you anticipated the Lions taking Jamal Williams, who they're going to love, they love him down here. What a great guy.
He
Jamal
is a great
Williams
guy.
is just a fantastic
People
human.
fell in love with him in Hard Knocks based really just on, that speech that he gave, but you walked away and you couldn't. How do you not root for the guy?
Oh yeah, it's
Wow.
the joy, just the joy of being alive that he carries. It's going to fit in well here. And so if you got ahead of that, or you saw even Jared Goff, you saw this offense blossom. Now there's some candidates. I just want to step through some candidates and get your knee-jerk reaction as I bring up these offenses as potential breakout offenses, because that could be more important than identifying breakout players.
Yeah.
They kind of go hand in hand, really. We mentioned Derek Carr. You mentioned intended air yards. Well, if Darren Waller is going to be getting intended air yards, it's going to be from Daniel Jones. There's not a lot they could have done to address the wide receiver position. They did bring back Darius Slayton. They bring in Paris Campbell, who I think is underrated if he can stay healthy.
Yeah, you and I are the only two, I think.
Well, it's good. I'm glad. It's glad we each have company on Paris Campbell Island. And they signed him to a 1-year, $3 million deal. One of the things I really love in free agency, just as a side, are seeing which teams smartly sign players to prove it deals, get production above and beyond what they paid, and they recoup a compensatory pick.
Yeah.
I think even the Rams signing Baker Mayfield, that's going to be one.
How about Dalton Schultz?
Sure.
1-year deal. I mean, that's a great signing for Houston. And granted, that's a team that hasn't used their tight end, but now we have a whole different offense. And and he's a pretty good pass catcher in that offense.
Yeah. And I don't think that Houston's going to be a breakout offense. I didn't include them in my potential breakout offenses, but I think they could be respectable. We'll see. We'll see. Now, we don't know how dysfunctional. In hindsight, we may look back at last year's offense and say it was just dysfunctional. And in some ways, a breakout offense can just be going from dysfunctional to functional, not functional to efficient.
Right.
But let's start with the Giants, because they're bringing it back. They've got those young tackles. Brian Dable, second year. What do we think?
Cautiously optimistic on the Giants. We did see some flashes of talent from Isaiah Hodgins in particular, who comes back to me as probably wide receiver 1 right now, going into this season. I thought there was some, and maybe it's just because he lit up my Vikings in ways that most receivers did, but I think there's a little something there. Daniel Jones was the 4th quarterback in rushing yards last year. Those rushing yards certainly count. Darren Waller certainly helps. Saquon Barkley's effectively on a 1-year prove-it deal as their franchise player. So, and you mentioned offensive line's better. I think there's reason to believe that this offense gets a half step better than it was last year. And there were a lot of spot starters outside of Saquon Barkley last year.
Right. That's the thing, is they were playing with spare parts, baling wire, duct tape holding it all together. Real quick, just to go back to the Vikings, should we anticipate any kind of second-year bump for the O'Connell offense? Some things that they can start to unlock now, because I know the Lions are talking like, hey, you like last year's offense? Well, now that we have had this offense and we're fluent in it, we can start showing you what this offense can do. And you buying in any of that with the Vikings?
Well, I would have if I thought there was some player specifically that I could point at and go, that guy is going to get a lot better. KJ Osborne's the best candidate for that. If you believe that Thielen was fundamentally cooked at this stage of his career, and he was dead last in Yak last year, 2.2 yards after the catch was last, and he was a negative 0.9 yards over expectation last year. If you think Thielen was kind of cooked, and here comes KJ Osborne coming up on just his 3rd year in the league, and if you think he can step into that spot, he would be a candidate. But overall, I think this offense functioned a lot the way it should function, and is going to function this year, which is going to feed a lot of balls to Justin Jefferson, TJ Hawkinson. The run's going to continue to be second. I think the Vikings had the 4th highest passing play percentage. So I think we saw a lot of what we're going to continue to see, and I don't think there are obvious candidates for big growth outside Osborne.
And we're waiting to see about Brian O'Neill and his recovery, right? Their best offensive lineman. He had a pretty gnarly injury.
Achilles,
Yeah. you going back to the Giants real quick. You said cautiously optimistic.
Yeah.
When I say Darren Waller, are you more on the cautious side or the optimistic side?
I'm on the cautious side, in part because, we've seen the talent's crazy, right? In part just because of age, and maybe, he'll be 31 going into this year, and I just don't know how much you're going to get better at 31. And, the hope, of course, is that Darren Waller stays healthy, and nobody can predict that. If he does stay healthy, can he unlock a top 5 season? Sure. Who else is going to catch passes in that offense? And I think largely you're banking on him staying healthy, not as much as anything else. But I'm a little bit troubled that Las Vegas was willing to walk away from him. This is a team that really needed the skill set that he had, I believe. They could have poured Jacoby Myers money, but they didn't have to pour any more money into him. They gave him plenty of money. They'd signed him to that new deal. Remember, he held out most of August last year. Waller did. They gave him the new deal. Then he gets hurt for much of the season, in and out of the lineup, not very productive. And the team just went, you know what? We're done. We're out.
Right.
I don't know. That doesn't feel good to me.
It's so difficult to tease this stuff apart, Paul, because I was talking with Cecil yesterday on our show about this, that probably the best value free agency, I mean, we like to predict and project and speculate and say who's the winners, who's the losers, but it does give you a clear picture of a team's priorities, of what they think of their current players, of how you win games, what matters. And you're right that when you trace, it's like one of those old, does anyone remember, is Family Circus still in, people read newspapers as their comic book? Remember like the Family Circus with the path the kid would take through the neighborhood? Yes. That's kind of what they've done with Darren Waller, right? They've been all over the chart with him with, there was problems, and they settled the problems, then problems with him staying healthy. And you mentioned KJ Osborne. I want to point out KJ Osborne finished really strong last year. So if you like KJ Osborne, make that trend. I know someone will pull out some stat, Paul, and say, well, only this percentage of the time does late season production correlate. But still, you want a player getting better as the season goes on, if he's going to be in a larger role. Darren Waller actually recovered to be fantasy relevant once he did come back. But are the Raiders rational? I mean, should we actually...
That's a great question, right?
I mean, are they just kind of twisting in the wind? And this is where we look at the Thielen move for Carolina and we look at the Waller move for the Giants. It's kind of like when you go to the grocery store and what you wanted to get wasn't there. So you just see what you can find that you can at least purchase to eat for dinner that night, right? The Vikings, the Giants weren't going to get a lot better at wide receiver in this free agent class.
No.
And they didn't have anything like Chicago had to dangle for someone like DJ Moore. So I think that the Waller trade was their way of saying, well, we need a weapon, or we need to upgrade the viability, what we can do with the receivers, the targets we do have. Now, Ted Nguyen, I mentioned this yesterday too on the show, Ted Nguyen, who does terrific film breakdowns on The Athletic, he said that he thinks that the reason the Raiders made this move, and specifically Myers, and he sees Myers as a replacement for Waller, which is interesting, because of his blocking, because Waller was not a good blocker, which does kind of match what we know about Josh McDaniels, right? So we'll see. It'll be interesting. Jacoby Myers is a solid player. I'm not going to dunk on the Raiders for signing him, but Jimmy Garoppolo, we'll see.
Let me ask this.
Yeah.
Objectively, least funny comic strip in the history of comic strips.
Yeah.
Family Circus.
Yeah. Right?
It
was very wholesome.
Yeah, very wholesome at the expense of any real humor, right?
It's true. I think we could do off the rails right in the middle here, where we can just talk about growing up on comic strips and what were your comic strips, because I have to do this with Noah, my stepson, where I've been meaning to get him a Far Side book.
Oh, yes.
And a Calvin and Hobbes book.
Oh, okay. I'm so glad you brought this up. So I've got the complete Calvin and Hobbes, which is 3 gigantic books that's got every single Calvin and Hobbes. And my daughter, Audrey, and I, we would lay in bed, we'd open up the Calvin and Hobbes collection, and she would do all of the kids' voices, and I would do all the adult voices. And we would read Calvin and Hobbes together. And I have so many great memories of that. And I also did Hobbes, by the way. I did the adults and I did Hobbes, because a lot of times it was Calvin talking to Hobbes, so we could do the back and the forth. And just the brilliance of so many things that were so brilliant about Calvin and Hobbes. The the fact that he was a 6-year-old who talked like a 22-year-old academic was it in some ways disingenuous, but it was kind of brilliant, and it kind of worked for him. The humor was there, just the visuals were so good, and just the way that Bill Watterson would create these scenes that you immediately recognize from your own childhood. And the fact that you just tapped into what it meant to be a kid. Most kids in most comic strips are just small adults. Calvin is the embodiment of what we remember our own childhood to be, with all of the fantasy and all of the scenarios that you would put through your mind, and all the ways that you killed time when you were alone as a kid is the way Calvin was doing it with Hobbs. And just, and then the last thing that I'll mention about Calvin Hobbs that I love, that Bill Watterson never sold out. He sold books. That was it. He never licensed all the stuff, right? There was never a Hobbs stuffed tiger to buy. And I love the fact that he never expanded Calvin and Hobbs into anything but what it was. And I'm sure he has made a tremendous living. He's a notorious hermit. Nobody knows where he lives. Nobody knows anything about Bill Watterson. And I like that he was happy with what he had and didn't have to try to turn it into TV shows and movies and collectibles and everything else.
Yeah. At the end of the rainbow, Paul, it's not a pot of gold. It's a pot of content. It's a pot of appreciation and gratitude, not a pot of what can we do more. And you're right that, and we're going to get back to football, folks, and when we'll go off the rails later. The thing about Calvin and Hobbs, and I think you're right that it actually is a brilliant little paradox, that Calvin is your inner child, all of our inner child to some extent.
Yeah.
But he is eloquent about the experience of being a child. And then that allows all kinds of really interesting philosophical discussions. There's a lot of philosophy in Calvin and Hobbs.
Oh yeah.
And yeah, you're right. It gets you back in touch with your inner child. It's funny right now, Noah's reading a lot of Peanuts, and I kind of blew his mind the other day. I said, Peanuts was originally for adults, and it's depressing. Really depressing. It's really, really depressing. Peanuts is depressing. And anyway, speaking of depressing, if you're a Jets fan, is what's happening now just another setup to be depressed? Or do you think that maybe Green Bay was holding Aaron Rodgers back a little bit, and this is that last act and showing everyone just how bad Zach Wilson really was?
I don't think we've heard of the last of the Jets. I love this team's composition. They have so many good players right now. Their defense is in great shape with Quinnen Williams and Sauce Gardner, and this Garrett Wilson could play. I didn't like the Alan Lazard signing at $44 million. To me was ridiculous, and I'm sure it was at the behest of Aaron Rodgers. I didn't love that part of it, but remember, they played without most of their offensive line most of last year, right? So they're getting back, all of these key players that are so important to that offensive line. And Bryce Hall looked fantastic. And we presume, now just the state of ACLs, we assume he's going to come back and be good at some point, and hopefully sooner than later. So really just only one question mark is at quarterback. And I guess the Giants are holding the Jets ransom right now. The Jets are not caving, and they're trying not to panic right now. But I think the Jets will find their way to some other better quarterback, whether it's Rodgers or somebody else that we're not seeing right now. Maybe they make a move for Kirk. Maybe the Vikings do go quarterback and they go get Kirk Cousins. Who knows? There's scenarios here where this team gets a lot better at quarterback, and the Jets suddenly, this is like a top 5 defense last year. You put quality quarterbacking on this team, and look out, the Jets are going to be really, really good, really fast. So I'm just excited for the first time in 20 years about what the Jets have got going right now.
Right, at least the Rex Ryan, Mark Sanchez, Darrelle Revis years.
Yeah,
it looked so good. They had such a young core. It was all coming up so wonderful for that team. So yeah, Jets fans have been hurt. Speaking of leaving emotional scars, and we'll see. I mean, just based on you watch Aaron Rodgers closely, at least twice a year.
Yeah.
Do you think that he is in decline?
Yes.
Well,
100% safe. I mean, look, I've seen a lot of passes torture my Vikings, and that arm. And granted, the thumb injury is an X factor. We don't know for sure how much that was taken away from him, but he was missing passes he never used to miss on,
Yeah.
and the ball velocity wasn't the same. And but still, massive upgrade over what they've got, even if those things are true and it were to carry over and it wasn't just the thumb injury. So, but he didn't look like the same guy. And, here in this market, when I'm doing my radio show in KFN, I've been talking about, I hope the Packers keep Aaron Rodgers.
Yeah.
He doesn't worry me at this stage. I'm more worried about the unproven upside of Jordan Love than I am about what I know about Aaron Rodgers right now. I'd actually prefer to have him.
Yeah, that's going to be interesting. We are going to get this. This will get consummated one way or the other, and we'll get to see Jordan Love. And at least he's had a lot of time in the incubator. We didn't, and the LaFleur offense is from that Shanahan offense bloodline, where the quarterback actually isn't as important. The quarterback just needs to execute, and maybe all these years in the incubator will help it all make sense to Jordan Love when he gets that opportunity. A couple of other offenses I want to touch on. I think we can all see the message is clear in Denver. They're going to run the ball a lot. Back to what was supposed to be holding back Russell Wilson. But is this a good recipe? Do you believe in Sean Payton to turn this around? Or, as I have posited, could we see this team with a new quarterback and a new GM? Sorry, I know the Vikings and George Payton, there was a lot of good feeling there when he got hired.
I like George Payton, as a person a lot.
But as far as his first stint as a GM, not going so well. How are we going to be looking at Russell Wilson and this team once we get into this new run-heavy Sean Payton approach?
Offensive line carries more culpability with what happened last year in Denver than I think a lot of people have openly recognized. And I want to believe that the line improvements, including getting Mike McGlinchey, which is no small signing, is going to really pay dividends for this offense and is going to unlock whatever is left for Russell Wilson. He was put into a bad spot. And I'm not trying to excuse his play, but he was put into a bad spot. And this is we now have competent coaching. We have an offensive line that's bookended by first round tackles that presumably will be healthy for this season. And then Jerry Jeudy in particular, I think is very good. Sutton is okay. I'm optimistic this team's going to be better. Now, I wish Javonte Williams would be ready for week one. Doesn't sound like that's going to be the case. And that's a huge setback. If he had not had that injury and it was just rolling based on everything we had seen prior to this, I'd be really optimistic. But as it stands now, I still think that the Broncos offense is a candidate to be one of the most improved this season. Do you see it differently?
Yeah, no, I think that you're right. And McGlinchey is going to help with the running game a lot. Give him some help on pass downs. Samaje Perine, that's going to be the underrated player going into the season, right? Mm-hmm. One of the things you can do right now, and best ball drafts and Underdog are really good for this, is you can see in ADP where there's this latent boost coming for players that people just haven't absorbed it yet, right? Yes. Like you said, Javonte Williams, highly unlikely to be ready for week one. And even if he is supposed to be ready for week one, we might see a J.K. Dobbins kind of situation where if he wants to push to get on the field, then things will sort themselves out. And you're not going to see Javonte Williams at full speed until some point in the season, if he even gets back to full speed this season, because it was not a garden variety ACL injury that he had. Samaje Perine's good. And Samaje Perine is set up to start for this team that, again, is putting a big emphasis on the run. Ben Powers, who they got signed away from Baltimore, another really good addition there. And I just like the clarity. I like that it's even Chris Manhertz, right? One of the better 6 offensive linemen.
Yeah.
Just this is what they're going to do. And I think that it's a good tonic for the way things went last year. And the offense actually wasn't too bad last year. Once they moved on from Nathaniel Hackett. At the end of the year, it actually came on. So you're looking at the moves and looking what Denver did. You like seeing the priority and you like seeing the execution. Okay, we got to talk about.
And I just like the baseline competency you're going to get out of Sean Payton and Joe Lombardi, right? I mean, they're not over their head, and they will be a stabilizing factor for an organization that desperately needs it coming out of the Nathaniel Hackett blunder.
And take the heat off of Russell Wilson too. The less attention, the less it's written about Russell Wilson, the better for the Broncos franchise.
Yeah, he became the lightning rod for a lot of the failures of that offense. And some of it deserved for sure, but that's not the position you want your quarterback to be in. The guy you have to suit up and play under center. That's a tough spot.
There was nobody protecting him. I mean, and I'm not talking about the offensive line, although that take is also very much on. It's been interesting seeing how there are things that have leached out over the last month or two, Paul, that Cecil said openly on our show during the season. Just things about how he was separated from the team, how he was kind of regal, where the rest of the team was more like the peasants, and how that creates a division, especially for a player that's supposed to be a leader, a player that's supposed to be a tone setter, a culture setter. I got to talk about Chicago and Carolina. And we can attack this from any number of angles, Paul. But I want to start with Chicago. And again, this is a team you've watched closely at least twice a year. This is a player in Justin Fields that we've all watched closely because of his fantasy impact. I think whatever happens with DJ Moore, whatever happens with the picks, if Justin Fields isn't the guy, they lost the trade. And if Justin Fields is the guy, I mean, they didn't just win the trade. We have a whole new era of prosperity for this franchise. So where are you on Justin Fields' growth? I know he's going to do what we want for fantasy, but that isn't what's going to translate to wins or losses or to make this trade look good in hindsight. Where are you at as far as your prediction or what you're looking for now that Chicago is fully committed to him?
Bears offseason's gone exactly the way I think it should have gone, and how I would have, if it were my team to run, I'd have done virtually all of the same moves that they've made to this point, including many of the defensive signings that they've had that have been really, really notable. Tremaine Edmonds and Andrew Billings, and they've improved the defense lots of different ways, and it was dreadful before. But more saliently for our conversation, I want to see what Justin Fields can do with more parts around him. And I think everybody makes the comparison to Jalen Hurts, and I don't think it's totally invalid. I mean, at this time last year, everybody's saying, well, Jalen Hurts hasn't proven he could pass, and there was some validity to that. But you gave him AJ Brown, and you gave him another year in a competent offense, and he flourished. I want to believe that we're putting into motion the same things for Justin Fields by giving him DJ Moore, a legitimate top 12 wide receiver in the NFL. The Chase Claypool trade looks bad right now.
But desperate. Yeah.
It was a desperate move, and they still have work to do at wide receiver, but they've got the ammunition to do that, including pick 9 if they want. They probably get the first wide receiver off the board if they want to do that. Offensive line's a priority. I'd like to see him work something there. Khalil Herbert, to me, I'd like to have seen him get a better, longer chance to maybe be the number 1. I'm worried that Foreman's going to take inside yards, goal line carries. I think Herbert's a pretty good running back.
Yes.
And I was really optimistic that this would be really his backfield to own once Montgomery left. And about 2 days later, that kind of got blown up by Foreman. And not that Foreman is the second coming of Derrick Henry, but he is a competent inside runner who will at a minimum spell Herbert. And I worry about stealing touchdowns as well. But I'm in on Fields. So if the question is, am I buying Fields at his ADP? He's quarterback 4, I believe. I think that's appropriate. I would draft him as quarterback 4 off the board.
I think the main thing is the processor, because what we saw with Jalen Hurts, and even what we saw with Jalen Hurts in college, the systems and his teammates set him up a lot for success. But I don't think the processor speed when he was playing for the Eagles before last year was there. And then you saw, but what do they say often with young players, Paul? The game slows down for them.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Is that going to happen with Justin Fields? To be determined. But like you said, at the price, if it happens with the quality of targets now he has at the other end of those passes. And I think what you laid out with Khalil Herbert, I'm just going to highlight, he's a good player. And
he is.
Dante Foreman's good too. But I think you're buying Herbert on this news because I think he still gets more than enough opportunity, Paul, to show that he well, let me back up and say this. You knew they were going to do something at running back, right? It wasn't going to be Herbert and Ebner. And do they even still have Darrington Evans? I don't know.
I don't think so.
They were going to do something at running back, right?
Yeah.
So if the something is just Dante Foreman on a 1-year deal,
that's not that bad. Yeah.
Then that's not that bad.
Yeah.
He's still going to get an opportunity. He's only in the 3rd year of his rookie contract. He's still going to get an opportunity to show them, hey, even though he was a 3rd-day pick, he's their answer at running back, at least for the time being. So it's going to be really exciting to see what Chicago does. And also, I keep coming back to these offenses. They're in the 2nd year. So you have an opportunity really to install and get to another level of fluency in the offense to unlock some of the things. Luke Getsy, we'll see what he can do. I don't know if there's that much. I mean, I guess we can go back to Adam Thielen, right? Is Adam Thielen going to catch 90 balls this year for 700 yards? But is Adam Thielen somebody that is going to be a win in fantasy, or is this like we talked about with the Chase Claypool trade, a little bit of desperation in a thin wide receiver market?
I think it's more the latter, unfortunately. An awesome guy, by the way. I mean, nothing but positive.
What a story,
things.
right?
Yeah.
He only even made it because they had him in as a local tryout, right? Because teams can have an unlimited number of local tryout players at this time. Like they have one big pro day, right, where they bring all these guys in.
That's right.
And otherwise, he was truly under the radar.
Totally under the radar, played anonymously at Minnesota Mankato and came from just a small town in northern Minnesota. His own college coach, when the Vikings were asking the college coach in this pro day, like, is there anybody here who you think's got a chance to step up and be a professional NFL level player? No.
Whoops.
So, the whole Thielen story is pretty amazing. And it worked himself up from special teams to periodic starter to the team's wide receiver one for several years before Justin Jefferson usurped him. And it's a great story and just a plus human being. But this does not seem like a particularly compelling landing spot for him. Although when you're battling for balls with Terrace Marshall and Laviska Shenault, as exciting as those guys may have been as prospects, they've proven nothing at this level. There's certainly the opportunity for Adam Thielen to simply be in the right place on the field, get a little bit of separation through his excellent route running, and then probably gets tackled, but that's okay. That's that might be where he is right now, and I feel like Adam Thielen's going to be one of those guys that's going to bounce on and off waiver wires. He's going to be a bye week pickup in the right week. Carolina's playing the Vikings. We'll go ahead and start him, whatever. And that might be it. I presumably Andy Dalton's not the starting quarterback, or not for very long, right? I mean, we don't. We have quarterback unknown throwing him the ball.
Right. CJ Stroud. I know that the Panthers brain trust is going to be on the road to Stroud's pro day, Young's pro day, and Anthony Richardson. No, Will Levis's pro day. And there was one picture that was going around of Frank Reich, find someone who looks at you the way Frank Reich looks at CJ Stroud from the pro day. We'll see. It's good to have some suspense. It's suspense for Texans fans, and we're going to wait and see if that third pick is traded. Again, could the Vikings be a team to make that move? Is it waiting out Arizona and their new GM as he thinks he's going to get something like with the number one pick? Because I think one of the things I remember reading about Carolina moving up to number one, Paul, was part of the reason they moved up from number one was it wasn't that much more than it was to move up to number three. So now I don't know how much of that is them. Roger Goodell probably, we can't tip the pick. We need to have it so that the number one pick's not known. But we'll see. We'll see what happens with that. And again, it's really interesting to think of these other teams that may move up for a quarterback. I want to circle back on a couple more talk. Go ahead.
Well, I'm uncanny that you knew that I wanted to jump in for just a second.
Yeah.
Why give Roger Goodell his 5th contract?
Why?
Yeah. I mean, I know why the owners do it, because he takes the heat for the owners, and that's the main job that he's got. But man, is it really the best thing for the game to have Roger Goodell into his 5th contract rather than bringing fresh eyes, blood, ideas, somebody with a spine and backbone who can stand up to owners just for their own good? I mean, I understand, owners, nobody wants that. Nobody wants to be stood up to. And at the NFL owners level, nobody ever does stand up to you, or very rarely. But man, you'd think for their own good, you'd want somebody with enough spine to stand up to owners periodically. Man, I'm disappointed by the decision to extend Goodell again.
Yeah, I hear you. And the philosopher or parser, over analyzer of language that I am, Paul, wants to say, well, is there even a way that you can distinguish between what's good for the owners and what's good for the NFL? Is there actually a material difference between the NFL and the cartel of the 32 owners? I don't know, because it's undeniable that Goodell has been good for business, right?
Yes.
He's been good for business, and even world events intervened, and they got a CBA passed barely by the hair on their chinny chin chin that was really favorable for the owners. I think a lot of players now that were a few years into it are waking up to like, whoa, this is not a good CBA for the players. Now, like you said, is there anything fresh? No. What's fresh about what the NFL has done lately? Adding games on Saturday or something, like trying to have a game every day of the week. Was there going to be Friday Night Football coming up this year or something like that?
I hope not.
So you're right. And you're absolutely right that any kind of, the NFL, what's the saying, Paul? Like pigs get fat, hogs get slaughtered, or something like that. And the NFL is kind of a hog in the sense that they continue to prosper and prosper and prosper, a lot because of the amazing investment, mind, body, soul investment the players make. And the DeMar Hamlin moment comes to mind. But at the same time, I also think the other thing that comes to mind, other than over parsing language, Paul, is the owners still have to figure out, like, they need an exterminator with Daniel Snyder. And how's that going to work out? So they have that to deal with, because I have a feeling Daniel Snyder is one of those dudes that if you're in the cartel and you know him, well, who knows what he could put out there if he gets unhappy, if he doesn't like the way things are going, if he feels cornered, who knows what he could do to endanger the league.
Yeah, potentially a lot, right? Which is why we assume he was even allowed to be owner as long as he was.
Right.
He's got to have dirt on the league. Got to.
Oh, sure. I mean, even just the whole way that, how is it that there's an investigation into the Washington franchise and John Gruden is the guy who goes down? How does that exactly work?
No kidding.
So we'll see. So it's all very sorted, but I always try to use the word cartel when I talk about the owners, just to really reinforce that that's what we're talking about. They're aligned in so much that they're aligned in their desire to maximize the profitability of the commodity that they own. And Roger Goodell has in the job of overseeing that, has done well. And like you said, because he's hated in some circles, that's a sign that he's doing his job.
Really. Yeah. He's the ticket master of the NFL. Ticketmaster's reason for existence is to be hated. You see those Ticketmaster fees. You just bought a $100 ticket. If you can find one that cheap, that puts you up in the balcony nosebleed, your $100 ticket, and you've got $48 of fees on top of that. And you're like, oh, I hate Ticketmaster. And you should. But what you don't know is that $48 is being divided between the artist, the venue, sometimes the promoter, and Ticketmaster. But they're taking the heat for the artist and the venue and people who you like. You love your venue and you love your artist. Don't know that. Ticketmaster takes that heat, and that's their job.
Yeah. Boy, there's a lot of that. But pay no attention to the man behind the curtain. Although, how about Robert Smith actually staring down Ticketmaster and winning and getting money back for? I even saw the email they sent out. It was like, thanks to Robert Smith, here's $5.
Yeah. I love it. The Cure's touring, by the way. Are you going to go?
Yeah. I'm not sure if we're going to go. We got tickets, bands coming through town that we most recently got tickets to. Pixies. The Mars Volta, which actually my wife grew up with members of at the drive-in and used to see them like literal garage shows back in El Paso. Those are El Paso guys at the drive-in.
Didn't know that.
Mars Volta, and Dresden Dolls, which I think is kind of like punk cabaret music that they're coming out of the woodwork. And of course, Jazz Fest is coming up. I mean, it's New Orleans. We're going to go see great music. You can go see some of the best music you've seen in your life on any given night. On the fence on the Cure, because it's in the Smoothie King Center. You know what they call the Smoothie King Center here, where the Pelicans play? The Blender. So
no, that's cute. They should.
I don't know if I want to go to a Blender to see a live music, but it's great, and I appreciate that. On the occasion of that tour, Paul, Robert Smith, the Cure, got them to give back some of the Ticketmaster fees to the people. I really want. We should just really do all off the rails. We should just start a new offshoot.
We'll do our own show. I would
but I want to let's just do a quick word association, right? Kind of. I think I used to do like kind of like the old polls, like strongly disagree, strongly agree, except it's like cold, cool, lukewarm, warm, or hot. All right. Trey Lance.
Cool.
Ooh.
I want to believe it's going to be better than that. And I'm still fundamentally a believer. I was invested heavily in a variety of leagues over the last 2 years. Perfect time to buy low. I'll say that. You'll pay pennies on the dollar for what he would have cost over the last 2 years. And the pathway to starting is more viable now than it ever has been.
Yeah, I think going back to Justin Fields, we had a lot of debate about Justin Fields last year. He's not a refined passer. The Bears didn't have a lot around him. Who knows if this new coaching staff is going to be competent? And all of those concerns were well-founded, Paul.
Yeah.
That was actually good analysis. And he was still a big hit for fantasy football if you stuck with him, if you didn't drop him. He was still a big hit for fantasy football. So it makes me wonder, are we overthinking Trey Lance? He's going to start unless he's hurt. He's going to start. But if you don't like Trey Lance, you maybe should be getting in on Sam Darnold. That's a really interesting reclamation project. Smart move on both sides of that equation.
Oh, for sure.
Okay.
By the way, let me note, because this went down in the last couple of minutes while we were chatting. Elijah Moore has been traded.
Oh, wow. The chat room was talking about, was it Corey Davis or Elijah Moore in real time? Go ahead.
Yeah, Elijah Moore and their 3rd round pick to the Browns for their 2nd round pick. So he didn't garner much. Just the 3rd to 2nd round swap is all Elijah Moore was worth at this stage where he was. And maybe after the signings of Lazard and Mecole Hardman, those things it was obvious that his time here was ending, but walks into, a spot where Elijah Moore likely is a starter.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. I mean, that certainly makes Cleveland a lot more interesting because you already know Donovan Peoples-Jones continues to develop.
Yeah.
He was a lot better in his role, I think, than people realized last year. The Browns wasn't exactly much see TV, although Jacoby Brissett also played better, I think, than people realize. You got Amari Cooper, your number one. You got David Njoku, who's finally living up to his potential. Yeah. You've got the running game with Nick Chubb and Jerome Ford. Don't forget that name, folks.
Yeah.
Late in your drafts, don't forget Jerome Ford. Now you had Elijah Moore as a slot outside dangerous player. And there was discontent. What I want to know is, how is it that Elijah Moore can get traded, but Denzel Mims can't?
Because nobody wants Denzel Mims, right?
Yeah, probably right.
There's no buyers on Denzel.
Yeah, exactly. There's a market for Elijah Moore. But you could tell he wanted out last year, and good for him. I like seeing players free Elijah Moore. Well, he's freed, and he's going to be playing with Deshaun Watson. And I think that sometimes it doesn't work out. Where, again, it's uncanny. Paul, in the chat room, there was some discussion. Is Corey Davis going to be a cap cut? What about Elijah Moore? And we see it go down. And what was really funny about that, and maybe Jeremy Fowler knew something he wasn't telling us, because Jeremy Fowler accidentally, when Mecole Hardman signed, said the Mecole Hardman signing with the Jets in Cleveland.
Oh, not Freudian slip, just a slip. Yeah, maybe.
Yeah, maybe. Well, I mean, you have to like Elijah Moore getting out of New York, period. I mean, just it didn't even matter where he landed. If he wasn't on the
Jets. That wasn't going to work. Yeah.
No, that the well was poisoned. So interesting. And the Browns underrated moves this offseason. Some of the teams I like, just real quick, I like Detroit, what they did to fix their secondary. I like that Jacksonville did nothing. I like that we don't need to do anything. We're just going to collect comp picks. We've got what we need. We're going to re-sign some guys, and we're good. And the Cleveland getting Dalvin Tomlinson, his game.
Yep.
Juan Thornhill, these are some good players that they got to add to their defense, and now they've upgraded their offense. So
you mentioned Detroit. I think Detroit has had a fantastic offseason. That team's gotten a lot better, and that's defensively they've gotten better. That's becoming it's going to be very fashionable to like the Lions, but for good reason. And the David Montgomery signing is healthy for them as well, and that. That was a good signing. They get, a player who can catch, run, can help them really everywhere on the field, 3 down back. You add that to the good offensive line, but the defensive signings for them really, really, really helpful.
Yeah. And again, that comp pick, and I'll mention this a couple more times because it's this time of year. Nick Korte, or Court, Korte. He works for over the cap, which is the definitive place to get your information about contracts, salary cap, etc. He in real time updates his compensatory pick chart, where you see the compensatory free agent signed, compensatory free agent signed away, and the formula. And another thing I really like about what the Lions did, and again, the Eagles have something like 9 compensatory free agents. You can only get 4.
Unreal.
But and one of the things they did, that trade for Chauncey Gardner-Johnson, they're going to recoup some of the draft capital that they gave up to get him, even though didn't work out for them to sign him long term. But the Lions also signed him to a 1-year deal. So maybe you make a marriage and you make a long-term deal, but otherwise this is a good enough player that you recoup something on the back end. Same thing with Emmanuel Mosley. It's really good. If he can stay healthy, and Cam Sutton as a Steelers fan, I mourned that loss.
Yeah, that hurt, right?
That really hurt. I mean, he's the one guy who could cover in the secondary, and then they bring in Patrick Peterson. Tell me something to cheer me up before we go off the rails about Patrick Peterson. Something, anything.
Peterson can still find himself in the right place at the right time, and I think that part's helpful. He had a bunch of picks, including some game endings, interceptions last year, one against the Lions off the top of my head. The gives up a lot of separation right now and can't necessarily make up for that with speed like he used to. But they also had been playing him on one side of the field, but they eventually, over the course of the season, started flipping him to both sides, and he can play both sides as long as you don't put him in the slot. I think he's going to be okay. Cardinals foolishly, wasted 1.5 years of his life by putting him in the slot, which is a huge mistake. And still a pretty savvy veteran. And he was the least of the Vikings' worries. As bad as the Vikings' pass defense was, you didn't go into every game worrying about Patrick Peterson. He was like the last guy that I was worried about. And I think he didn't fit the philosophy of where this Vikings front office is, which is signing nothing but 25, 26-year-old players. And they just weren't going to invest in an older player. But I think they would have liked to have had him back. And then from just like a leadership standpoint, elite guy. I mean, just so smart. We had him on our radio station regularly every week. Smart, funny, introspective, A+ person. And that part of Patrick Peterson is going to be, it will be welcome in Pittsburgh for sure.
Yeah. With Mike Tomlin. I still remember one of the big successes that made me feel good about Mike Tomlin was Ike Taylor. His career was just in a tailspin whenever Tomlin got hired. There's your Minnesota Vikings connection, by the way. And he found his game again. So that's my theory. I'm sticking to it. I'm hoping about Patrick Peterson, and I'm trying not to think about the Pittsburgh Penguins. Speaking of non-football off-season type topics, because we just spent a while talking about a lot that's been going on. Football taking the headlines, even though every other sport is actually in action. What's been taking up real estate in Paul Charchian's head when football's not taking up so much?
Well, I'm so glad you asked because I consider my off-season something of a failure, Sig, because you did not join my fantasy music league.
The playlist.
Yes. Fantasy Music League is a time that's come, and of everybody I know, I was like, if there's anybody that's going to be in,
I need to get
on this concept, it's going to be Sig. Let me explain how it works. It's a music-based league in which every week there is a theme in which the commissioner establishes. The theme could be like duets, or it could be, here's the first song on my 80s mixtape, or it could be instrumentals, or it could be whatever you want it to be. So there's a theme for every best Led Zeppelin song, whatever you want it to be. And then everybody that's in the league submits a song by using the Spotify shared link, right? Okay. So a link to it in Spotify, link to the song, and you put any comments you want about the song and why you picked it and stuff like that. Then once everybody's submitted their songs, the voting goes live. And now you've got 10 points to distribute among all the songs from the league. My league is 12 people deep. And so I'll give some songs that I really like 4-ish points, and songs that I don't like get no points. You can't vote for your own song. And then you don't know who you're voting for. So it's all anonymous. And so then you vote for everybody and find out how your song did. Hopefully your song garnered the most votes. So you're trying to match both the taste profile of the other players plus how well you match the theme. And you try to earn points that way. And it is a blast. And I've gotten introduced to a bunch of new music I wouldn't have found otherwise. And it's so fun to tap into other people's thoughts about great duets or whatever the theme is that week. The Fantasy Music League. Tons of fun.
I love it. Well, I love music. I probably love music even more than football. I don't know if I love music more than sports. I could go off on a 5-minute World Baseball Classic tangent right now. I love sports more than specifically football. I know, scandal. But boy, I love music. And I love this idea. Now, give me an example of something that you did that you felt was really clever, or a moment that you won, or otherwise felt like you nailed it. you submitted the right song, you won over everybody. What was a triumph that you've had from the fantasy music league so far?
I'm so glad you asked that. And I had a great personal moment of triumph with this, and I'm going to try to find the email that got sent to me by a friend that's in my league. Here it is. So I'm trying to remember what the theme was. I'm not positive, but there's a band I love called the Joy Formidable. Mm-hmm. The Joy Formidable's got a bonkers song called Whirring, Whirring, Whirring. And I submitted the song. And my friend Brian in Washington sent me an email a couple of days later. And he said, I can only imagine this was your submission. So I already love this because he's figured out my music, my taste in music. And
right.
Good Lord. I know you've mentioned the Joy Formidable before, particularly the quality of their live shows, but damn, how have I not heard this song before? It is incredible. And then he sent me an email a couple hours later. He said, unsolicited, my wife said the same thing at dinner tonight. Holy shit, what is that song? And he went on to say, there are a few really cool things about Music League. Discovering new gems is at the top of the list for me, along with staying in touch with friends about a topic we mutually love. That is to me, that is a great moment.
That's perfect. Well, and isn't that what we all love doing, especially as men? I know something. Let me tell you about it.
Yes.
And introduce our friends, people we know, to something that we love and sharing that passion. And I have, as you were describing the fantasy music league, I think maybe, Paul, maybe the answer here is that it's just fantasy is going to go meta because it just means a shared love.
Yeah.
Right? It's just a way to commune over a shared love of something. I keep thinking, Kate and I are working on, we're going to corner the market on fantasy baking competition. When the cooking competition shows start, when people want fantasy analysis on that, we're ready. We're all over that.
By the way, I'm interested. I played Fantasy MasterChef Junior with my daughter when she was younger, and we loved it. We had a ton of fun playing. So I'm interested in that.
Yeah, it's just anything, right? I mean, we could do, I'm surprised there hasn't been more of an attempt for award shows like the Oscars and the Grammys and things like that. Yeah. Kind of like fill out your bracket, fill out your awards guesses. There's all kinds of things with reality shows, competitions that could be done. But mainly, like that email laid out, it's about staying in touch with people that you care about and communing over something that brings you happiness. And it's perfect. And I do want to share one quick story about that before we sign off.
Oh, good.
Because back in the day, the old Yeller, the Footballguys message board, which was the place for football discussion like 20 years ago. It's still a great place for the Footballguys message board is still going strong. But back then, message boards, that's all there really was.
Yeah,
other than your news groups, the predecessor. And we did a fantasy band draft where you drafted your band member by member. And it was all to culminate in a show that was going to cover an album. And I had my plan before we even started. I knew what I was going to do. And my first round pick was Freddie Mercury, of course.
All right.
Of course. And
now, which pick in the first round did you have?
I don't remember. It was like the second. It was. I remember this, Paul. It was deep enough in the first round. It wasn't the first pick, so I was sweating it.
That's exactly what I'm asking.
Because I think, maybe Jimi Hendrix. I don't even know. I think actually, so Freddie Mercury was my first round pick. I think I ended up taking like Keith Richards. I can't remember who I took to play the saxophone. King Curtis, maybe. I can't remember exactly who I had put together as the band. But the album was The Rise and Fall of Ziggy Stardust.
Oh,
Freddie Mercury singing Ziggy Stardust. Because it's the album about the archetype rock star.
Yes.
The first real rock star born out of that. And yeah, it's fun. We loved fantasy. We can apply to anything. We can draft anything. We can commune over anything, share our joy, the spark, the twinkle in our eye that different things give us. And we always have a great twinkle when we get to talk to Paul Charchian and get to talk to all of you wonderful, fine people. Thank you so much for making time for us in your lives. It's a great honor, and it's great to get to hang out all year. There's always something going on in the NFL. There's always something worth talking about. There's always a new fantasy league to join. And we want to join with you because you're so classy.